Welcome to Pay Equity and Justice for Freelancers by Practice Best Practice. We want to thank our funders, Rockland Trust, Charitable Foundation, the Co-Creative Center, Creative Sessions, funded by Mass TDI and the Bar Foundation, and the Mass Cultural Council's local cultural councils from New Bedford, Middleborough, Acushnet, and Dartmouth, and some of our partners, New Bedford Creative, New Bedford Art Museum, the National Park Service, and SNG Project Gallery. We have a few notes before we begin. When you have a question during any of the presentations or during the discussion afterwards, you can type your questions into the chat. We'll be monitoring it. When we select your question, we'll ask you to unmute so you can ask it and have it recorded. This will also give you the ability to ask follow-up questions if needed. If you prefer for us to read the questions, we know some people are nervous on screen, then tell us that when you type your question into the chat. We suggest that you put your Zoom in speaker mode rather than gallery mode during the presentations, and you will see whoever is actually talking. Closed captioning is available. You can turn it on if you need it from the CC icon on your lower toolbar, which you can see in the visual that's just below this note. You just click on the live transcript CC icon and then show subtitles, and that'll come on. We have a short survey that we'll be putting up near the end. It's anonymous, but it helps us improve and helps us with our funders. Feedback is important to us, so we really hope that you will take the time. It's only 10 questions. You can feel free to email us with comments at any point or add them to our chat or put them up on our YouTube with this video or Facebook. At any time on Facebook. Resources will be available for you to download from our website shortly after the workshop. We'll have the slide deck, we'll have the calculator, the pay equity calculator, and other things. The website is at practicebestpractice.com, and the workshops are on the workshops page. We'll also be putting this recording online within a few days for those who missed it or wish to review. It takes us a few days to get the credits and things attached to it, but we'll have it up as soon as possible. It'll probably be up by the day after 4th of July. The holiday will slow us down a little bit. And we hope that you've liked us on Facebook and Instagram and signed up for our email list. And our workshops are always free, but they do cost to produce. So if you can make a donation of any size, we greatly appreciate it. You can make tax deductible contributions at the donate button on the top of every web page on our website, and we get 100% of that. Tonight on our panel, we have Erica Steves, who's the Executive Director of the Lenny Zakim Fund. We have Nirali Patel, who's an ABA Legal Fellow at the Low Income Tax Clinic at Greater Boston Legal Services. And we have me, Dan Santoro, who's been a freelance consultant with my company, Resource Development Associates, for over 4 decades. So I have been in this trench. And we suggest that you read our full bios at the website for more information on the panel's backgrounds. All right, with that complete, the screen sharing should have gone off. We're going to start with Nirali, who's going to be talking about what makes a freelancer versus an employee and what the roles are. So Nirali, go to it.
Awesome, thank you. So let me just get myself adjusted. Okay. Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming today. Today, I'm going to be discussing the differences between a freelancer versus an employee, and specifically what the tax consequences are. So very generally, what is a freelancer versus what is an employee? I would like to make a note that everything that I discussed today is very general, it is very broad, and if you have specific questions, please reach out. Things can change based on each individual circumstance. Everything changes case by case. So take what you can from today's presentation and apply it the best you can. But if you do need further help, we are always here. So first, a freelancer is generally a person who pursues a profession without long-term commitment to any one employer. They are someone who is self-employed. They generally pick their own clients. And over on the left, you can see some examples. And just because you're a developer as a freelancer doesn't mean you can't be a developer as an employee, but this is what we generally see as popular freelancer careers. So for example, a program developer might have many different clients that they might make websites for. You could be a freelance translator where you might go from company to company helping with translation. So for example, at GBLS, we have Mandarin translation, but the people that come for translation aren't exclusively employed by GBLS. They go to many different other companies. You could be a videographer, so you could do wedding videography and picking your own clients. You could be a writer, writing for magazines, for books, for newspapers. Another popular one that we see at GBLS is accountants and bookkeeping. So the main takeaway from here is a freelancer doesn't have long-term commitment to any one employer. They generally know when their relationship is going to end. Versus an employee is a person working for another person for a person or a business for wages or a salary. And I'm sure we know a lot of different sectors with employees. So one of them is janitorial services. So you could be a janitor at URI during the day. That's your employer. You could have more than one employer. So you could be a janitor in the morning, and then you could be, I don't know, working at McDonald's at night. But those are both employers. Food service is another industry, daycare, hospitality, delivery drivers. So think about Amazon delivery drivers. They know that they're going to have indefinite relationship with the employer. They're not sure when the relationship will end unless they decide to quit or they get fired or they get laid off. So now that we understand the differences generally between a freelancer and employee, we're going to be discussing misclassification in more detail. So what is misclassification? Employee misclassification is the practice of labeling workers as independent contractors rather than employees. So usually when you're an independent contractor, you will receive one of these two forms. A 1099 NEC was the old form that the IRS had. This was a form for 2020 and before, whereas tax year 2021, we see form 1099 miscellaneous. The differences between the two, 1099 NEC was used for multiple purposes. So it wasn't just used for independent contractors. You see rental income on there. You would see it was used for more purposes, whereas the 2021 miscellaneous is generally now used for independent contractor status. So this is the new form. So why do employers misclassify? Employers benefit a lot from misclassifying. So you will not receive overtime pay if you're an independent contractor. You don't receive employer provided health insurance. So generally our independent contractors have to go out, find their own insurance. You don't have access to unemployment benefits or workers' compensation. This is a huge problem and was a huge problem during the pandemic. A lot of people lost their jobs, were independent contractors, but were misclassified as independent contractors, and they weren't eligible for pandemic unemployment assistance. And then the next point is the key point for the tax world. Employers avoid paying Medicare and Social Security tax, putting the burden on the worker. So the worker ends up paying the employer side of Medicare and Social Security and the employee side when they're an independent contractor. Now, if you are truly a freelancer, if you're truly self-employed, this isn't a problem. You're expected to do this. It makes sense why you would do this. But if you are misclassified, you're losing out on a lot of money. So as an independent contractor, you pay 15.3% in FICA, which is the Medicare and Social Security tax, whereas an employee pays 7.6% in FICA. And this can make a difference of hundreds of dollars at the very least, but sometimes for some of our clients, it can make a difference of thousands of dollars. So the key takeaway from here is when an employer misclassifies, the worker pays more money out of pocket and loses out on the key benefits we just discussed now. So now you're probably wondering, how do I know if I'm an employee? How do I know if I'm an independent contractor? And this is a factor test, which we will go through right now. So if you're an employee, you are working for someone else's business. Whereas if you're an independent contractor, you are running your own business. So going back to the Amazon delivery driver, you know, when you're an Amazon delivery driver, you are working for Amazon, you're delivering, you're making a profit for Amazon. Whereas maybe if you're a videographer or you're a developer, you're working for yourself, you're your own boss, you are making a profit for yourself. This is your true business. An employee is generally paid by the hour or they have a set salary, whereas an independent contractor is paid upon the completion of a project. Once again, this is very flexible. I know, for example, some artists get paid halfway through the project, or you may get paid quarterly. It really depends, but very generally, just think about when you're getting paid. Are you getting paid by the hour, or are you getting paid in bits and pieces as you complete a project? So that's just something to think through. The next one is also very essential. Whose equipment are you using? So are you using your employer's materials, tools, equipment, or do you buy your own tools? Do you buy your own materials? So a good example is a painter. Do you work for a boss who provides the paint, the brushes, all the cans for the paint? Or do you provide all of that equipment yourself? You're paying for that out of pocket and going to a client's home and painting. An employee typically works for one employer or a few part-time gigs as an employer for an employer, or do you work for multiple clients? So going back to our example of the janitor. The janitor is working for URI or a college in Boston. I went to URI, so that's why I'm saying URI. But Boston College, for example, and are they going to another employer at night like McDonald's? Okay, so here you're still working just for people that are employing you, so your status is going to be an employee. But an independent contractor usually has multiple clients, and they're their own boss, and they get to handle all those clients themselves. The next one is, as an employee, you're continuing your relationship with the employer. So your relationship with the employer is indefinite. Generally, you don't know when it's going to end. Either it's going to end when you decide to quit, or you get laid off, or you get fired, or you're just looking for another job. Whereas with an independent contractor, your relationship is completed once a project is completed. So if you have a client that asks you to paint a mural, your project is going to be completed once that mural is painted, and then you move on to the next client. Whereas with the employer, they're not moving on from a boss to a boss. It's just who they, whoever their supervisor is, that's who they're working for. And then last but not least, who has control over the work? So as an employee, your employer assigns you the work. So going back to the videography example, if you are working for a videography company and you have no creativity over the job, your boss tells you, go to this wedding, take these specific shots of the bride and groom. You have to be done at 5 p.m., edit the video, and you have to show it at the reception the next day at 6 p.m. That's your employer controlling your work, telling you exactly what to do. In that scenario, as a videographer, you are an employee. Whereas an example of a videographer as an independent contractor is you are running a business, a bride and groom come to you as a client and they say, we have a wedding in Venice, Italy. We would like you to come. We love your work on social media and you have full control over whatever you want to do. We just love your end product. In that example, you are an independent contractor. So it really is a factor test, and no one factor weighs more than the other, but this should give you a general idea of how you should be classified. So what are the consequences for misclassifying? From the tax perspective, there will be penalties for failure to withhold FICA. So the employer is supposed to withhold the FICA tax, and since they're not doing it, the employer will be charged with a penalty in addition to having to pay that Social Security and Medicare tax. There are other consequences outside the tax world. So the employer will face wage and law violations, so failure to pay overtime and minimum wages. They will face unemployment insurance penalties for failure to appropriate money to the state unemployment insurance funds. And then in addition, they will pay penalties for violation of state's worker compensation. Now, as someone who is misclassified, it is your choice which action you want to pursue. So for example, if you come to me and you say, hi, I just want to pursue the tax consequence for misclassification, that is all we focus on. But if you want to pursue tax and wage and law violation or tax and workers' compensation, that is entirely your choice. Just because you do one doesn't mean you do all four. So if you come to me or you go somewhere and you want to pursue a misclassification, you thought about all this, you say, hey, in 2020, I received a 1099. I really think I was an employee. What do I do now? And usually what will happen from the tax perspective is you will think about the IRS rules for misclassification, which is very similar to what we already talked about. But the IRS focuses on these three factors in more detail. So the first is the behavioral factor. So you ask yourself, does the company control or have the right to control what the worker does and how the worker does his or her job? So the more control a company has over your work, as discussed earlier, providing tools, providing equipment, giving you that 9 to 5 hours, the more control it has, the more likely you're an employee. The less control they have, the more likely you're an independent contractor. Next, the IRS looks at your finances. So are the business aspects of the worker's job controlled by the payer? So that's kind of like the tools we talked about. What expenses you have. Are you using your own car? Are you using the company's car? What are you getting reimbursed for? If you buy paint, are you buying the paint or is it the employer that's buying the paint? So that's what they look for in terms of finances. And then finally, they'll look at the type of relationship. So are there any written contracts between the client or the independent contractor or the employee and the employer? Are there any benefits? Do they get vacation time, insurance? How long is the relationship? So as discussed earlier, if it's indefinite, you're more likely an employee. If it's going to end once the project is complete, you're more likely an independent contractor. One key point, if you do have a contract and your contract says that you're an independent contractor, that doesn't automatically make you an independent contractor. Just because something says that, you shouldn't take it for its word. Really assess your role in the job. So when people come to our office, these are kind of the questions we ask them to think about and really answer themselves to identify the misclassification. How did you see yourself in the business? Did you have your own business, or did you view yourself more as an employee working under the employer's direction and control? Did you have a boss, or were you your own boss? Did you have to clock in and out of work? Those time constraints, 9 to 5, whatever. Did someone tell you to do certain things? Did someone have control over how you did the work? And did you have business expenses? So these are just some questions to think about. So what we like to do at GBLS to advise clients for misclassification is we first review the misclassifications under Revenue Ruling 8741, which is the factor test that I just discussed. And then we explain to them what years are the best years to pursue misclassification. And it's usually 3 years from when the payment is made. So right now you have the option to pursue it you can pursue it for any years, but you'll only get a refund for 3 years for the portion that was paid for Social Security and Medicare. So right now the years would be 2019, 2020, 2021, and then we can help you correct anything for 2022. And the reason the way you pursue it is you amend a return, you only show your fair share of the Social Security and Medicare, which is the 7.5%. Then what we would do is file form SS8 with the SS8 unit with the IRS, and they just help us. They're a second layer that just say, hey, this person is truly an employee, not an independent contractor. And then what we can help you do next is if you would like to pursue any other actions like overtime, minimum wage, the unemployment protection, we have people within our office that would help with that also. Some clients don't like to pursue misclassification because the employer will find out that you made this you made the choice to file the SS8 form, and that you are asking the employer to pay their fair share. We like to say that misclassification is a big issue and you should pursue it, but at the end of the day, it is always the taxpayer's choice what they want to do. So some taxpayers will make a misclassification for some of the employers that they no longer work for and don't pursue it for employers that they do work for. But if you would like to pursue misclassification and you're scared of retaliation, that is also something we help with. This is a poster we made to just help you look at the differences between employee and independent contractor. And I believe this will be up on the website. And then last but not least, this is another resource that we have created to help you file taxes as an independent contractor, which I believe will also be up on the website. And if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call or My email is also there. So any questions that aren't answered today, or if you have questions that are more specific to your needs, I am more than happy to answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nirali. For those of you who came in late, I will just reiterate, if you have questions, please type them into the chat. We will be following the chat. If when we see questions, we will ask you to unmute and read the question. And if you prefer not to be on screen, then you can simply come in. We will read the question for you, but it'll be harder for you to do follow-ups. All right. So without further ado, I will move on to my piece. Hang on a second. I gotta start my screen sharing. Okay. So we are, oops, I gotta make that a little smaller so I can see the whole thing. All right. So for those of you who came in late, I'm Den Santoro. I am a longtime contractor, self-employed freelancer, and I will be presenting on calculating wage worker hourly equivalents for freelancers. I will also be talking about the wage equity calculator that we have created, which you'll be able to download from our website once we get the resources up. Those will probably be up tomorrow, including Nirali's slide deck and the slide deck you're about to see. So without further ado, we're going to start off with just a quick recap. What is a freelancer? Nirali covered this well, but it's a self-employed individual selling their time or their services. That person is their own tax entity. They're a sole proprietor, an LLC, some type of corporation. They are not an employee. And they run their own business and control their own work. That's, again, from Nirali's presentation, that's the most important piece. To start, we need some basic employment and wage facts. You can't calculate what you need to earn in the course of a year easily without understanding some of these basics. First off, a standard hourly work year is 2,080 hours, which is 40 hours per week by 52 weeks. So whenever you're calculating something that's an annual expense down to an hourly expense, you need to make sure that you divide it by this. Oops. Come on. Minimum wage in Massachusetts currently is $14.25 an hour. That's as of the beginning of this current year, which works out to $29,694 a year as a baseline of pay. Not a lot. I wouldn't want to try and live on it. Minimum wage for a one-person, the minimum living wage for a one-person household is $21.88 per hour, which is $45,510 a year. That is considered a living wage, and we'll talk more about living wage further down into the presentation. This is from MIT's Living Wage Project and their living wage calculator. But it's important to know that that is considered for one person living by themselves, what it takes to support yourself in Massachusetts on any given year. Living wage is the amount a household must earn to support the household. I would argue that even the MIT wage calculator is too low at this point because they have presented their numbers at the beginning of this year, and inflation has taken off substantially. And also, of course, all their research was for data from prior to the beginning of this year. But at the very least, you can look at it as a good baseline. In Massachusetts, the median income, that's the income that half the people earn more than and half the people earn less than, in 2019 was $85,843 a year, or $41.27 an hour. That is what is considered at this point, that as of 2019, it's often considered a good approximation for what's considered a middle-class wage. Again, in a range around that number. So you need to think about your salary and what you need to earn as a freelancer in relation to some of these numbers. If you're an organization that hires freelancers, one of the things that you often ask yourself is, can I save money hiring a freelancer? And the answer is yes, you can. However, as Nirali indicated, you should not do it by shifting your costs onto the freelancer. That's not saving money. That's tantamount to wage theft. You should consider paying the equivalent hourly pay that you would pay an employee if you hired them, because that is an equitable pay rate. You save money by only paying for the hours that you need. You pay person only for the tasks that you are hiring them for. You pay them only a certain number of hours. You're not paying them 40 hours a week necessarily. You're also not paying them when you don't actually need them. You save money also by getting specialized skills that you only need for a period of time. If you need somebody to design and build you a website, you hire them to design and build you a website. When it's over, you're not continuing to pay them as your web designer because it's done. By paying employees and contractors equivalent wages, and we'll show you how to calculate those equivalent wages a bit further down the road, you're promoting equity amongst your staff. People realize that what you're doing is making adjustments to pay so that everybody's working out to, once their costs are calculated and their benefits are calculated, they're essentially making similar wages. It also helps show that your organization is living up to justice and equity values that you promote. I assume many of your organizations promote justice and equity, and we'll want to talk about that. And also, there's another group called Staffing the Mission, who's done a lot of this from the pay equity side for employees. And we'll mention that one of the people from them is planning on being here tonight. Hopefully we'll get some conversation with that. So what are freelancers responsible for costs? If you are an employee, a lot of things are covered for you, as Nirali covered some of those. But as a freelancer, you're responsible for a variety of things. So as Nirali mentioned, you're responsible for your side of the Social Security FICA tax, which you would see as a deduction on your payroll, on your paycheck. You have to cover this, and you don't get around it. You have to make sure that you have that money. You have to pay that money on a quarterly basis, and it will be money that's coming out of your pocket. So you want to build that into your hourly rate. You have to cover your own vacation. If you're a freelancer, nobody's paying you for a vacation, so you have to build in the cost of a vacation. A minimum 2 weeks would be 4% of your pay. You also have to figure in holidays. If you're a freelancer, nobody's paying you on holidays. You don't get paid holidays off. So you have to calculate that in, which is another 5.5% of your hourly, of your wages. You also have to look at marketing and bookkeeping. If you're a freelancer, you're constantly looking for the next gig or the next several gigs, or maintaining, the information out there so that people can find you for the next gig. So you're spending time on that. You also have to keep track of your own books. You have to keep track of your income. You have to send out invoices. You have to keep track of your taxes. You have to keep track of all your business expenses. That takes a bunch of time. Over the many years I've been doing it, we find that 20% is about average for how much time. Now, that's not every week, but that's over the course of your annual work. Some weeks you're going to be doing a lot of bookkeeping. Some weeks you're going to be doing a lot of advertising. You also have to cover workman's compensation or disability insurance. They're not covering it for you if you're not an employee. And if you get injured and can't work and you don't have workman's compensation insurance or disability insurance, you're not getting paid. And not getting paid is a hard way to live. You also have to cover your own health insurance. In Massachusetts, we're required to have health insurance. So if you're working for yourself, you have to make sure that you have bought into some health insurance system from the Health Connector. Perhaps you might get some subsidies, but we can't assume that there are subsidies. In most cases, if you're earning good money, you will not have subsidies. So you will be paying for an entire year's worth of health insurance. You also have to cover travel mileage. Now, you may be reimbursed, and if you're reimbursed, you can calculate that in, as long as you're being reimbursed at the federal rate. If you're not being reimbursed at the federal rate, then you're covering some of that cost. But if you're traveling for any purpose that has to do with your with working for a contract, then all of that money is reimbursable and write-offable. You also have to cover your own computers and software. You have to, even if somebody provides you a computer and software for a particular project, you still need a computer and software to cover your bookkeeping work, to cover all of your advertising work, to cover your social media. You need to have that of your own. It can't be some companies that's providing it for this contract, and it'll disappear when that contract is over. You probably have to cover your own cell phone. They're probably not subsidizing your cell phone, but you'll be using it for work purposes. And you may need a landline. All of that will be related to your business, and you have to pay for that. And you need workspace. Even if your employer provides some workspace for you, that'll be workspace for their project, not workspace for your projects and your other things that you have to do. So you have to consider that as you're doing your calculations. Now, this is a snapshot of the wage calculator. And you can see that we have covered all of the components that have to be deducted. So we have an hourly pay rate, and you can look at the various things that have to be taken out to make this work. And we suggest that you start with what is the level of income you need to be making to actually pay all your bills, not the level of income you need to be making from without any of this stuff extracted, but with all of this stuff extracted. And you can see if a freelancer is making $30.20 an hour, they're effectively making minimum wage once you extract these numbers, which is approximately $29,600 a year. And I'll talk about some of these numbers a little bit more when we get into the specifics of the calculator, but these numbers are based on average cost or research cost per year, and then divided by the 2,080 hours so that you have what they are an hourly cost for. And you can see that if you want to make effectively the living wage that MIT suggests, your freelance pay has to be around $42 an hour. Once you subtract all of these things out from the pay, that'll get you $21.87 an hour, which is effectively the minimum wage, and effectively $45,484 a year. Now you can see that some of these numbers, because of the percentages, go up. So I'm backing up. Then, for example, if you're making $30 or you're making 20 minimum wage, your employer side Social Security number being 7.5% is going to be $227 an hour. But if you're making effectively the living wage, that number goes up because it's a percentage of your hourly rate. And it's your hourly rate that you're paying taxes on. It is not the annualized after expenses. Whoops. Now, the MIT's living wage grid provides a number of things, and the link is here in the slide deck, and you'll be able to get the slide deck, as I said, later. If you were one adult with no children, they consider the living wage to be $21.88 an hour. If you have a child, 44th, 23, because now you're covering childcare and other expenses for your child. 2 children, again, it goes up. 3 children, it goes up. If it's 2 adults and only 1 is working, those numbers go up again, except that the 1 child, 2 child, 3 child number goes down because the assumption they're making is that the other non-working adult will be doing some of the daycare. If you're 2 adults, both children working, with both working and no children, that number goes down a little because you're sharing expenses, but as you add children in, it goes back up pretty quick. Because again, childcare and other child-related expenses. Now, the Mass Labor Marketing Information Group provides, and they're part of the government, the Mass government, provides a number of pieces of information. They research various types of jobs. And if you're an employer or an employee, an employer or a freelancer, you should know some of these numbers. For example, they classify occupations and give them job titles. You can find out more information on the specifics of this. And you can see from their research for various jobs, how many people are employed in those jobs across the Commonwealth, what the median annual income is for that position. And that median, again, is the number of people half are above it and half are below it. What the mean is, which is if you take all of those people and average their pay, and then the annual entry level value and the annual experienced level. These are all good numbers for when you're trying to figure out what you should be earning for the kind of work that you are doing. And when you're trying to figure out how to back into what's the hourly rate you need to be charging to make this work. For employers, you should be using some of these numbers when you're trying to figure out what you should be paying for a particular type of position that you want to hire, whether a freelance or not, and using some of this to come up with some of these numbers. And one thing I want to mention is the nonprofit martyr syndrome. Where a lot of people think, well, it's a nonprofit, they shouldn't be paying like the like people who are in for-profit organizations. And I have to ask, why would you think that? Reality is, if you're working and doing a particular type of job that requires a particular type of skills, you should be being paid what those skills are worth. And if we continue to keep that nonprofit martyr syndrome going, eventually there won't be anybody willing to work in these positions. Here are some others that I put in. You can see some of these human resource managers, training and development managers, computer systems people, financial people. And some of these pay levels may strike you as, a little stunning if you're in the nonprofit world, but these are, not only are these real numbers done by research, they actually include people in the nonprofit sector in them, which actually they would say brings this number, the average numbers, down a little bit, and could be higher if everybody was making stuff in these ranges. Next up, we have Eric Esteves, who's going to give us a perspective from a funder, someone who actually writes the grants. He is with the Lenny Zakem Foundation, which is a major organization up in Boston. And without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Lenny.
Well, it's to Eric.
Eric, I'm sorry. Eric, I'm sorry. I knew Lenny a little bit.
No problem. No problem. But yeah, I mean, I guess I just wanted to say hello, everyone. Just give kind of my, response to the presentation by both Dan and Arali. And so for me, I guess two descriptions come to mind. One is fascinating and the other is illuminating. So for me at the Lenny Zakem Fund, we are a funder that really has a small footprint in that we support small grassroots nonprofits with very small budgets, often just getting off the ground. So for me, one of the things that we provide in addition to grants is a lot of training and professional development for nonprofits, especially really it's for folks who are often new to running nonprofit organizations. So one of the things for me, the illuminating part, it's both scary and reassuring, but it's really, the content and presentation was a lot of information that kind of clarifies kind of, rules. So on one hand, some of the organizations we fund focus on worker rights, for example. And these are people who are classified as full-time employees typically, but often find themselves having to file complaints against employers for theft of wages or not being paid overtime, so loss of benefits, or not being working enough hours per week and being classified as full-time versus part-time. So I see a very direct correlation to this kind of independent contractor versus or freelancer versus employee classification and the misclassification. So one of the things also that comes to mind is for nonprofits that are hiring freelancers or independent contracts, just paying attention to the rules, but not necessarily being afraid. Sometimes nonprofits will generate an RFP or a request for proposal to seek services of freelancers. And usually the scope is fairly laid out and well defined in that kind of requests. And then freelancers will often respond to it with their unique approach and methodology and the services that they bring to the table. And then there's usually a dance where the scope is developed and outlined by both entities. So for me, the scope creep is something that often happens, but I think there was a point about the work being defined and determined by the employer versus the freelancer, and I think that's a key component of just making sure that it's mutually agreed upon scope, that it is clearly defined, milestones and measures as well. And I think the other thing is just that notion of misclassification, so the loss of benefits. In that, on one hand, you want to kind of when we seek services for freelancers, we ask them what their rates are. So we try not to set our own predetermined rate, but we try to inquire about what their rate is that they're charging for services. Often, when we do an RFP, we request, I think, 3 bids. We don't necessarily go with the lowest bid. So we go with, the right match of, freelancer and bid and costs. And then another thing that comes to mind for me is in terms of, not being too prescriptive in what we say we're willing to pay, but being clear up front what the budget is for a specific project. I think that's also something helpful to know, because yes, we do want people to be earning more than a living wage and more than minimum wage for their services and being paid adequately for their services. So I guess that's my quick summary of my response and thoughts. I'll pass it back to you, Dan.
Okay, thank you, Eric. It's good to have a sense that there are funders out there who actually want to see people being paid, living wages. I think it's important. I think that that the funders are particularly in a position to help make that happen because they're able to put some actual clout behind it by saying, here are some floors for various types of things that we want to see people paid when we're funding them. So that's the majority of the presentation. There are a few other things to mention, but we'll start off at this point by opening it up for questions. You can either type it in or you can raise your hand. You might want to put yourself in grid view at this point, gallery view, and turn on your video if you'd like. If you want to raise your hand, the reactions space down at the bottom of your screen gives you the ability to raise your hand. And if you have questions, which I would find it hard to imagine that you don't, please let us know. Or reactions. Just reactions will be fine. Nobody? Well, I'm gonna poke. Ashley, you reacted to some of this stuff to me before, and perhaps you would like to talk a little bit about what you saw when you saw our testimony to the MCC and how you reacted at that point.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for calling on me, but that's okay. So I don't know if you want me to introduce myself, but I represent, I guess, Fall River in this webinar here. And so in my role at the Fall River Arts and Culture Coalition, I serve as an advocate for both individuals and for organizations. And so, having this kind of these tools in my toolkit are so very, very important because, as you pointed out, Den, we just undervalue ourselves in nonprofits, and we have to really stop doing that. And and I think that the turning point and the pivot point, we I think are aware that it maybe started 2 years ago, but it's now's the time as we start to take advantage of federal funding trickling down through whether city ARPA applications or the Mass Cultural Council. You mentioned presenting to them, but they have both an organization and an individual grant round coming up. And when everybody's doing those applications, like, they need to be putting in an actual wage for themselves that's appropriate. I think that a lot of times organizations or individuals start with, how much am I going to ask for in this grant? When you think about working with funders, and you cap yourself, as opposed to just making your budget in a way that you're paying yourself properly and those that you're working with, and then looking at the final number. I think it's kind of a reverse way of working, but yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And I can just say that from my own standpoint, working with some more experienced artists, they're interested in doing programs, and they say, well, I have to make $100 an hour. That's just what I have to make. That's great. Well, I want to bring on other people to work with me, younger artists, and teach them the ropes, but we'll pay them $15 an hour. Whoa, let's pump the brakes here. Why is it okay to recognize what your living wage is and what you need to bring home, but not recognize that for others that you're working with? And so I think from an organizational standpoint, we have to use the tools that are provided by whether Practice Best Practice or the MIT calculator that you presented. A little bit of both, I think, is the best. That's why I like your calculator. It takes all of those different things into account and really use that as a tool to advocate every single time we sit down at the table. How could we ever uplift young creative professionals at $15 an hour? It just makes me so angry. That makes me so angry. If you make 100, why are they making 15? So, from my standpoint, I think that looking at a lot of organizations around the state of Massachusetts, a typical rate that an artist will make leading a workshop is around $25 to $30 an hour. And so that rate has been there for about the past 10 to 15 years. And it's still there with some organizations. So, now, as I said, this is the pivot moment where you say, nope, we're going to pay $40 an hour. That's what we pay for workshops. And that's where you set the tone for it. It's a little bit about being strategic with your budget, but this is just so important. We're never going to be able to uplift our communities. And as we always talk about, arts as an economic, cultural driver. Let's get paid for driving that train forward, right?
Thank you, Ashley.
Sure.
Yes, I very much agree. And both freelancers and organizations like Ashley's and funders, like Eric's, need to start making some decisions about that. Excuse me. And I'm going to bring the calculator in at this point, because I think one thing that we all need to do is we all need to make a commitment to paying people at the bare minimum at a living wage, and that preferably higher than a living wage, preferably moving closer to a median wage. And I think organizations need to do that. I think individuals need to stop taking jobs at those and start telling other people to stop taking jobs at those numbers. And I think the calculator is a big piece of that. So I'm gonna bring the calculator up and share my screen again. This calculator will be available for everyone to use as soon as I can find it. It's open on my desktop. There we go. There it is. Okay. I have a lot of windows open. Okay, so the calculator, which you'll be able to download in Excel format or in Pages format, depending on whether you're Windows, Mac, Android person, is set up to allow you to do calculations for pay. Hopefully you can see this reasonably well. But there are several sections of it because I wanted to have built in the $20 an hour that I've been seeing some people offering, which turns into a sub-minimum wage of about $7.85 an hour, which nobody should work for. And I also show the minimum wage, which is at $30.20, the effective living wage, and effective median wage, which you have to be at around $73 an hour for the effective median wage. So I think that it's important that you be able to do these calculations. Now, this calculator is set up so that it has the percentages built in for the Social Security, vacation, holidays, and your bookkeeping and marketing time. It also has some other numbers that are your costs divided by 2080 to be an hourly wage. You may have different costs here. So you may want to be able to use this. You can actually edit this to change some of these numbers. So if your computers and software are costing you, $1,500 a year, take 1,500 divided by 2080 and change this 48 cents an hour to whatever that number comes out to. If you know what your healthcare is actually costing you in the course of a year, the average in Massachusetts is $1.48 an hour, but yours may be different. You may have higher costs, you may have higher deductibles, whatever, but you can put your real number in there. If you put your real number in there, however, don't forget to add in your costs for copays and other things, not just your monthly payment to the insurer, but the other things that are actually being paid out of your pocket, calculate them in. They are calculated into this number for the averages, but you want to calculate your own in. So you can actually edit those. So say your healthcare is actually, $3 an hour because you're paying a lot out of pocket. So if I want to, I can change this to 3, and you'll see that that takes the number that $20 an hour translates out to $633 instead of the number it was before. All right, so I'm going to undo that. So what you want to do is you want to look at these numbers, and you can simply type a number in here. So say, you're trying to figure out what's going to get you to 50,000 a year, right? So if you want to try and hit 50,000 a year, say we put in 45 as a good guess, and 45 gets you to $49,088, so you can just type into that number and make an adjustment. If you're an employer and you're trying to figure out what to pay your freelancers, you can just type that number in to see what hourly rate translates into that number. So I encourage you to download this. It's free. There is a donate button in it, but you don't have to use the donate button. We appreciate it, but it's not necessary. I want you to all spread the word about this as well. And I want you to actually be able to take this and use it when you're trying to figure out your freelance rates and when you're trying to figure out what you're going to pay freelancers, and for funders to figure out what the bottom line ought to be. Okay, so.
Could I say something?
Absolutely.
I'm a muralist, and I went to a meeting in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I'm also my first degree is being an economist. And I went to a meeting with the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and I brought up this that people shouldn't be working for $29,000 a year or whatever. And I broke it down so that other artists would understand that if they paid health insurance, the taxes, the FICA, all of these different things, they would be getting paid $2 an hour. And that meant that if the city of Springfield, which they do this all the time with community development grants, they offer $5,000 for you to put up a mural. And we're talking a mural of 17 feet by 8 feet high. So I put that on on their page and everybody's page and whatever. Now nobody talks to me, and they think of me as a troublemaker. And I'm just done. You know, I am so done, but I wanted to hear what you're all we're going to speak to, because we even have to pay the accountant. Hello, you know. And there is so much. And there are places where they even buy the paint and you're still working for $2 an hour, and they want to get the paint that was left back, as if you're going to make money on it or whatever. It has become crumbs, you know, breadcrumbs. And institutions, starting by the Mass Cultural Council, they are not. They're like, well, even the Northampton Cultural Arts Council said to me one day, well, we prefer to give $200 each to every person who applies than giving big grants to people. And I'm like, are we missing something here? How come? This is outrageous. And so yeah, I'm glad you're saying it, and you're saying it in different, and I hope that the audience does there and get community grants to empower the community, know what empowerment means. And it doesn't mean $14 an hour for nobody, not for the boss, which makes 20, or for anybody. I always tell people, a real contractor who makes walls and builds houses makes thousands of dollars to paint inside an apartment. And you cannot pay us 20 grand to paint a wall with design that is our creative design. It's just, I won't take any more of your time, but I needed to say that.
I appreciate your adding that in. I think it's important. I think we all need to start, taking back that power. If we don't work for those kinds of rates, then that work doesn't get done. If we find people working for those kinds of rates, we have to go talk to them. If we find people offering those kinds of rates, then we have to go talk to them. All of this material will be available on our website, so please feel free to share it with other people. Feel free to use it, particularly share it with organizations. The testimony, I gave live testimony to the MCC, and the reaction was quite noticeable on some MCC faces. I then followed up with testimony, which is also up on our website, will be up on it. Well, it's up on the workshop, it's on the resources page right now, but it'll be with this workshop as well. But it's all material basically that I just presented. And it's important that, we all as people who work for contracts say no, and teach other people to say no.
Exactly.
And because if we're driving the creative economy, then other people are making money. If those other people are making,
yes,
we should be as well.
Yes.
And I'm not saying we're going to get rich on this, but we should be able to live a comfortable middle-class lifestyle.
Right.
Granted, you're going to be ramping up over your skill set and over your lifetime, but you need to be able to make reasonable money. If you can't, you're not going to be able to put any time and energy into whatever practice it is that you're freelancing at, whether it's a creative practice or something else.
And that's what they're using as a put down. They will say, well, it depends on people's expertise and how they paint and all that. And I'm like, screw you, because you don't care. You're using that excuse to not pay us. Because if I had said $5,000 was enough, you would have given it to me.
Yep.
But you were not comparing me with somebody in fine arts inside the museum. Even then, Picasso was painting like ever he wanted, and he would have gotten paid a lot more. So the community foundations, people who actually get money to pay artists are saying that to me. But now it's over, because now I was told I was a troublemaker and nobody will give me a grant or hire me.
You need to create a whole lot of other troublemakers making good trouble. That's going to be important. Narelle, you had something to say?
Just very quickly, I'm really glad that you shared your story. And I agree with Den. I think in a way it feels like retaliation, right? People are
Yes.
not giving you the money and the job because you're speaking out. And to me, it sounds like something needs to be organized so these community groups value the work that you are bringing.
And I'm going to bring in Staff the Mission here. I don't know. I don't think Betsy showed up. It's unfortunate. I was really hoping she would present some information on Staffing the Mission. We will have some information, at least a link to Staffing the Mission, if not to their report, on the website as well. But Staffing the Mission is looking at this from the employee side, from looking at what's good pay for an employee in a nonprofit, and about nonprofit burnout and the nonprofit martyr syndrome. And they're also working to create a classification that will be like the good housekeeping of approval of hiring organizations, nonprofits that hire people that pay appropriately. So they're going to be creating this classification that people can earn by paying. So they're working on the funders, particularly. I mean, not the funders. They are working with the funders, but they're working on the organizations particularly. But it's also important that we know about this. Basically, Staffing the Mission. Hang on a second. I'll just give you a quick show. All right. Staffing the Mission, they're a project of Class Action, which is another group that's working on some of this material. And Betsy Lander Wright and Anastasia Ling did this particular report on improving jobs in the nonprofit sector. I'm hoping that she will let us put it on the site or link to it on her site. But we want to make this available as well. I think it's important. Also, there's a group called Wage, W.A.G.E. That is working to create classifications for people hiring artists for various things, for murals, for shows, for various art projects, and what those things should pay depending on the size of the organization. So hopefully we will be linking to them as well. I don't think they will have any problem with that, but I do have to contact them before I put their stuff up. But you can search for it, W.A.G.E. And find information on what they're doing. And for people who are in the creative sector, it's important. It's not quite a union, and maybe at some point we'll have a union like the musicians do. The musicians have a union in Boston for working musicians that works on some of these issues. But that report is exceptional. And again, I really want to make sure that that people are spreading this word. It's important to spread this word, and it's important that we all stick together. I work in a variety of industries, not just creative. I am a working photographer, but I also work in a variety of industries. So my range is fairly broad, depending on whether I'm working in one industry or another. But it's important to know what the industry can bear, but it's also important to push the industry to bear reasonable amounts. And again, not to put the cost of them saving money on the freelancer or on their employees for that matter. Okay, we have some comments here. Ashley loves having Alvita loves having this sheet. Amy McDonald, she's leaving the adjunct professor shuffle. Oh, yes. Wage and the others look very useful. They are. It's important to know, and it's important to have stuff that you can present to people. Sometimes I'll tell you a little thing that I don't do it a lot, but every once in a while I see something advertised that is advertised as a contract or advertised as a job, and and looks like they knew who I was when they put it out there. Sometimes I will apply for them simply to have the conversation about what they should be paying people. Not necessarily to get the contract, but to say, that's awfully low, or you're right in the ballpark. I think it's important that that these people be updated on the realities of this information. Do we have other questions out there? I find it hard to believe nobody has questions. Again, if you just want to type them and don't want to be on screen, we will read them for you.
Dan, I guess I have a question.
Sure.
Do you foresee, I mean, this sounds kind of strange, but I'll throw it out there. Do you foresee someone like the MCC who has control over grants, maybe in the future setting almost like a matrix or precedent for what people should be paid?
I do.
Or is that a dream world?
No, I do. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons that I am approaching funders, that I tried to get funders in on this, and that I want us to share these with our funders. The funders should have this information too. They may be paying you too low right now, and you may have just realized it, or they may be paying you equitably, but you want to give them more ammunition for paying equitably. There's another piece to that for the funders, that is the program to overhead ratio, which is set extremely low.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, a lot of times it's like 5%, but if you don't have good administration, you don't have good program. So they have to look at more of the administration as part of the program, not, and those numbers have to be higher. It's a matter of delivering good program. It's not a matter of every dollar goes into somebody who's working on the front lines, because those people without proper support and proper pay burn out and leave, and they're constantly training. And if training doesn't count, then you're constantly using money that should be going into programming. So we have to address a number of issues in this area. Practice Best Practice is going to continue working to do that, and we're going to be working with. We've made connections with some people like the Class Action and the Staffing the Mission people. We've made some connections with the people at Philanthropy Mass, who we hope will work with the funders more. So we want to continue to see more of this happen. But again, we need to work with other freelancers, particularly the young ones who are just coming up and have no idea how this works.
Right.
Yes,
I have
Alvita?
a question.
Sure.
Another one. Are you working with these organizations also to give credit to the artists when we're doing the work? Usually I get that the institutions get all the credit for putting up a mural, or for doing an art gallery show, or for building this, and that. It's like when you go to Walmart and you give a donation for diabetes, and they go to the Diabetes Foundation and say, "Hey, Walmart just gave millions of dollars to the Diabetes Foundation," but in reality, it was the people who lived in that community who were donating. And my experience has been that I'm always constantly also challenging these institutions by saying, yeah, but I did the work.
Well, one part of it is, if you're working on a contract or a grant, you should include copyright issues.
I do. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. They will
Well,
send out stuff.
if you include copyright issues and they violate them, then you can go after them. It may be, unproductive, but it's something you can do. Dina, you're here. How does Superflat do that? Superflat is an organization in New Bedford that works with a lot of muralists, putting murals around the city.
Oh, really? What's the name again?
It's super flat and adventure. I don't know if you can, I can put it in the chat too, but when I heard your comments, I was thinking, I don't know where you live, but we do as an organization is support mural artists, and we either hire them or help them receive contracts and get paid at a more than of our average wage for creating murals. So that's our goal, is to pay artists and like set the stage, making sure that artists are getting paid, and then like repeatedly having conversations with organizations or private institutions that are hiring mural artists. So it's kind of like changing the shifting of the culture of underpaying mural artists. So I don't know if there's an organization in your city that might be able to advocate for you. So that's like what we do. We cover the insurance and handle all of the ins and outs of the mural making.
I think that if there isn't an organization like that, then you might want to approach some organization that's in your community. Follow up with Superflat. Dina just put that link in the chat, so check that out, and you can learn something about how they did it. But there are organizations that are willing to do spin-off projects or spin-off, take other organizations or other things under their wing and can use their own internal, insurances and payroll systems, et cetera, to help the projects get off the ground, rather than become their own right away. Matter of fact, that's how best practice started. We worked with Co-Creative Center and the Art Museum, and then the New Bedford Economic Development Council, and then COVID hit and they asked us to spin ourselves off, and now we're our own 501c3. But I think you should look at those links Dina just put in, an email and a website link, and see about if those are people that can help. Other questions?
I think Colleen had a question. I'm not sure.
Colleen?
I'm good now. I got my answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Anybody else? Okay. Again, please spread the word on this. We will be up on, this will be up on the website, the whole video and all of this information. The resources, most of the resources will go up tomorrow. The ones I have to get permissions for from, staffing the mission and others, I will put up as I get them. So keep checking back, and the video will go up as soon as possible. I have to get it to our person who puts the credits on the end and puts the opening screen up at the beginning, so that we can then get it up. And when it's up on our website, it's actually going through YouTube, and YouTube has closed captioning too. So people who need closed captioning can turn that on at YouTube as well. And we want as many views as possible. We want to share this widely. We want to share the calculator. Feel free to tell people about that link and share that link to the calculator, get people to use it. Again, there are 3 versions. There's so make sure you get the version that works for you. There's one for numbers, which is the Mac. There's one for Excel, the most current version of Excel. There's one for older versions of Excel. And I'm told, I don't use Google spreadsheet myself, but I'm told that depending on the version of Google spreadsheet you're using, you may need one or the other of the Excel ones. But there's 3 versions. One of them will work for you. So begin using that. Share the word, share the wealth. Nirali, any final comments?
If anyone has any questions about the tax angle, or have any tax issues in general, and if you meet our GBLS eligibility guidelines, you can feel free to also contact me for that. But other than that, thank you everyone for coming. This was a very insightful presentation, even for myself. So I really appreciate everyone listening and coming. Thank you.
Eric, any final comments?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to learn more and, hear what's going on and people's perspectives. But yeah, I mean, well, I'll try to make sure we share it out as well, so that people know more about the issue.
Great. You have access to funding colleagues that we do not. So I really would love to see it get out to more of them as well. Thank you all so much for coming. If you don't already follow Practice Best Practice on Facebook or not in our email list, or on Instagram, please follow us so you know what we're doing next. As we get funding for the next workshop, we pick one and announce it. We have a huge list. If you have ideas for workshops you want to send to us, feel free. And all of the workshops we've done so far, starting with showing for exposure and other classic artist mistakes and how to get yourself paid, and on through taxes for creatives and art of numbers bookkeeping for creatives and a number of other things, artist residencies, are all up on our website. So please go check them out, watch the videos, share them around, let people know. We want to spread this information as widely as we can. It's up to us, both as people who are creatives, and it's up to funders, and it's up to organizations that work in the nonprofit and creative sector to get this word out there and help raise equity across the board. Thank you all so much, and good night.